Real quick, before we get into the show, I wanted to share a new service called Getita that Ken and I have been using that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you? You can take your invoice value, say you have an invoice value of $100,000, you're going to be paying an additional $25,000 just to get that onto U.S. soil. And similar to the increased shipping costs, your customers are not receiving a better product, even though the total cost of that product has increased by 25% solely due to tariffs.
You're going to have a huge lead over your competitor because you can manufacture quick and send it in versus the days of shipping containers directly into Amazon. They didn't exist last year. I know that, at least not for us. Now in the future, who knows? They've lifted some restrictions, but it's always going to be out there. At a snap of a finger, Amazon can say, nope, no more.
E-commerce every year continues to get more and more competitive, and you have to be scrappy. And I think that this is a way that you can be scrappy and increase your competitive advantage over your competitors that are still relying on a manufacturer. And what I'll also add is that the manufacturer that you're previously ordering from, they're not going to disappear. You can continue to engage with them. You don't have to produce all of your units. Maybe this is a supplemental thing.
Welcome everyone to the Firing the Man podcast, a show for anyone who wants to be their own boss. If you sit in a cubicle every day and know you are capable of more, then join us. This show will help you build a business and grow your passive income streams in just a few short hours per day. And now your hosts, serial entrepreneurs David Schomer and Ken Wilson.
Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's episode, we dive into why you should consider sourcing products from the USA, as well as our journey into self-manufacturing. Ken, what's going on, man?
David, happy to be here in the podcast studio today. Tape some shows, and we have some great content here. Something that we've explored dove right into in the last year and a half is sourcing from the U.S. and self-manufacturing. So we're going to share our journey today with the audience and kind of break out the steps and how we accomplish that. David, let's kick it off.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say generally, if you were to take a course from, say, a guru, they're going to instruct you, or maybe even not a guru, they're going to instruct you to source from China. It is not even something that gets a lot of consideration. It's go to Alibaba, source from China. And there's a good reason for that. China, I heard this stat the other day, they produce more engineers per year than the United States has in total engineers. And so China is good at manufacturing. And so, I would say 5 years ago, this was kind of a no-brainer, but you fold in 25% tariffs and $20,000 shipping containers, and it's no longer a no-brainer. And so we're going to dive into these topics a little bit more throughout this episode. And we've done a case study, which can be found at
firingtheman.com/USA,
where we look at some of our own products and we look at the implications of these tariffs and of the shipping costs and really make a quantitative case for manufactured in the USA. So one thing what is driving this, and this has been an initiative in some of our portfolio companies, is why would we look to source products from the USA? Well, one is higher profit margins. And we'll get into this a little bit more as we look specifically at tariffs and shipping costs, but we have found that in some instances it is just cheaper. From a dollars and cents standpoint, it is just cheaper to source from the USA. And, I'd also say that, there's some cultural similarities. You're speaking the same language. You have the same holidays. You have the same business hours. Typically, you have faster product launches because there's shorter lead times. And so those are just some of the reasons that I think people should consider. Ken, what about you? What are some things that you think people should consider?
Yeah, absolutely. As we talk about sourcing products from the U.S., I mentioned it a little bit ago, shorter lead times, like that's huge. Over the last 12 to 18 months with COVID, it's shipping, sometimes not even the cost of the container, but the delays, labor shortages, you've got port delays, unloading, as well as, if you're sourcing from the U.S., you're removing failure points in the supply chain. All the things we just mentioned, port delays, trucking, if you're trucking your goods. So just in general, shorter lead times overall versus, sourcing from Asia. The next one here is providing more jobs in the U.S. I think that's maybe a personal one. I know, David, you and I have talked about it before, but it just makes you feel good if you're able to provide jobs in your community and help people that you interact with every day in your community. It really just builds your community up. And so providing more jobs in the U.S. It's a good thing. One thing that David and I, we always talk about explaining to people what you do, right? Like David, in a former life, you were a CPA. In a former life, I was an engineer. And so when we're in the office chatting with people, they're like, oh, well, what are you going to go do? Oh, e-commerce. Oh, well, what's that? Oh, I sell stuff online. Oh, well, what, it's just like this huge thing. And if you're sourcing from the U.S., if you're self-manufacturing, then you could actually say, oh yeah, I do this here, right? And so it's a lot easier to explain to people if you're operating in that space, in that model. I think it's easier for people not in this space to understand that. And the last point here, which is probably one of the most impactful on this entire list, is when you're selling those products, you can have a stamp on there. It says Made in USA. And that alone is going to bring huge conversion rate increases to that product. There's a stat here we found, Perception Research Services International found out that 4 out of 5 shoppers said they noticed Made in the USA claims on packaging, and 76% of shoppers claim they're likely to purchase a product after noticing the Made in USA label. That's huge, 76%.
So we've talked a little bit about shipping costs, and I'd just like to apply some numbers here. So those of you that are tuning in on audio, I am going to describe a graph I have in front of me. For those of you that are on the website, we have a graph that shows container freight rate for a 40-foot high cube container. And, you look at December 2019, a 40-foot container ran you about $2,000. And that was reasonable. And at the onset of the pandemic, you really start to see this number climbing up. And as we sit here today, recording this episode, we just booked a container the other week, and I believe it was for $19,000. And from a per unit cost, that is a huge impact. And so what I'll point out is that the customers are not receiving a better product because you're paying for high shipping costs. And in order to compensate for this, we really need to make an adjustment in our prices and pass some of this on to the customers. And so that is something that has been a huge spike, and if you don't adapt to this, can cause a major disruption in your overall company. What a product that may have been profitable but had tight margins, you fold in increased shipping costs, and now it's no longer profitable. And so, that's item number one. Item number two is tariffs, and these started back in January 2018 and have been rolled out over what they call lists. So there's list 1, list 2, list 3, and list 4. And it has been our experience that most of our products are getting hit with a 25% tariff. And so you can take your invoice value, say you have an invoice value of $100,000, you're going to be paying an additional $25,000 just to get that onto U.S. soil. And similar to the increased shipping costs, your customers are not receiving a better product, even though the total cost of that product has increased by 25% solely due to tariffs. And so you combine both of these factors, and it really creates a whirlwind in terms of profitability. And so I'm going to look at a specific case study, and I'm going to look at one product. And so typically when you're talking to a supplier, they're going to give you a unit cost, and that's just the cost to buy the product. But you have a bunch of additional costs in addition to that, and that will get you to your fully loaded cost, and that's the number that we really care about. And so back in 2019, we had a product that we bought. Our unit cost was $5, and the per unit shipping cost to get it from China to the U.S. was 70 cents, and the outbound shipping cost was 42 cents. That was to just get it into Amazon. And at this point in time, this particular product did not have any duties on it. And so if you add up all these fully loaded costs, we were at $6.46. So you add your $5 unit cost and then a $1.46 of additional cost just to get the product into Amazon fulfillment centers. And so this particular product had a 43% profit margin and really was a pretty high performer. Now you take the same exact product and you fast forward into 2022 and you look at the fully loaded cost. So as I said before, in 2019, our per unit shipping was 70 cents. It is now $3.51. If you look at the duties, which in 2019 we didn't have, and now we have a $1.66 per unit duty on this particular product. And then the overall just cost of shipping into Amazon has increased about 10 cents per unit. So the fully loaded cost of this product has went from $6.46 up to $11. And again, the customer is having the same experience. They are getting the same product. They are opening the same package in 2019 and 2022. But from a profit margin standpoint, we have decreased from 43% down to 32%. And you look at cost per click in terms of advertising increasing, that's a huge deal. And so, you fold in longer lead times and taking all of this into account, it just really makes sourcing out of China a lot less attractive. And so we can talk about this theoretically, but I wanted to apply some real numbers, and I figured there's not a better place than within one of our own portfolio companies to take a look at. And so it stinks to have a unit cost of $5 and then other costs of $6, right? It's a bummer. And so you may look at that and say, I couldn't get it made in the U.S. for less than $5 today. Well, you may be right. But that's not what you're concerned about. If you can get it made for less than $11, or less than your fully loaded cost, you're going to be money ahead, and that's going to impact bottom line. And so, anyway, that is why I think people should be considering sourcing in the USA.
Yeah, David, I think that case study is very impactful. And just so, if you're listening to us in a car or whatever, it's whenever you get to a spot where you can download it, we have this free PDF on our website, firingtheman.com/USA, and it has all those case studies, all the slides in there as a resource to reference it. But you bring up a really good point, fully landed cost now in terms of, is it a better business case to source from the U.S. or source from China or anywhere else? That fully landed cost is crucial right now. And so, yeah, that's definitely something considered, something we considered for sure. Moving on here, kind of want to go over some of the stuff that we were thinking of as we were transitioning to self-manufacturing and sourcing in the U.S. So this list here just kind of lists out a lot of the stuff that as we were doing a business case analysis, we went through these supply chain issues, just consistently have supply chain issues, whether it's raw materials, whether it's containers, whether it's supply chain issues we've had for 12 to 18 months sourcing from China. $20,000 containers and $14 to $18 for a kilo for air freight, which I don't know that we've air freighted anything in probably 18 months. And so, yeah, just the cost of shipping is insane. Quality control. I know China's known for the quality control is a lot lower, and you could say pay them more to get higher quality control, whatever. I think it's always going to be an issue because they're trying to save cost and pass that on to you as a lower grade product. That's just, I think it's ingrained in how they do business. So if you're self-manufacturing, quality control is on your lap. That's well within your control. And so it is a benefit. Declining profit margins. David went over the case study, at a high level. We've seen a 30% increase in CPC on Amazon. And what's pretty interesting, if you look at Amazon, the date this is airing, Amazon released their earnings report for Q4 of 2021, and it just so happens that their advertising revenue went up 30% in Q3 of last year. So imagine that. They're passing that cost directly on to third-party sellers. Don't see that going away. Amazon FBA fees are increasing. In some instances, we've had a couple of manufacturers compete directly with us on Amazon with our same product or similar products. So that's a concern. Another thing to think about with self-manufacturing is if you can save on costs, like David mentioned, fully landed costs. If you're able to transition to self-manufacturing, you can decrease your cost, and that translates to profit. And your business is worth a direct multiple of your profit of EBITDA, right, at the end of the day. And so if you're able to transfer to self-manufacturing and be more profitable, you're going to have an asset. Your company that you're building is going to be worth more money at exit. Another one here is inventory restrictions. If you're selling on Amazon or if you're selling anywhere, you've had inventory problems with 3PLs or Amazon or wherever you're storing your products. And if you're doing self-manufacturing, you're going to have a huge lead over your competitor because you can manufacture quick and send it in versus the days of shipping containers directly into Amazon. They didn't exist last year. I know that, at least not for us. Now in the future, who knows? They've lifted some restrictions, but it's always going to be out there. At a snap of a finger, Amazon can say, nope, no more COVID. Obviously we don't even need to go in there, how much impact COVID has had. And then another one we considered, this was a mathematical problem, a business case that we walked through. And, when you transition to self-manufacturing, lead times for us normally source any of our products that we source out of China are from, minimum of 90 days, sometimes up to 120, 150 days of lead times. And that's a time that you have cash tied up. And as well as if you can't get it to market, we have one brand that peaks between like April and October, and our shipment last year didn't arrive until June because of port delays and just shipping delays, and we missed out on a lot of busy time with that brand. And so all of these that I'm listing here were kind of what we evaluated and when we decided to pivot into self-manufacturing. So I'd like to turn it over to David now and talk more on the kind of the background, and we've got some slides here. It's going to be if you're watching on YouTube, you'll probably see them. Otherwise, go to the website, get the download because the images here are pretty impactful.
Definitely. So last probably March or April, as we were strategizing, we have one particular company that makes strapping goods, and we decided that this would be the best candidate to start self-manufacturing. And we decided to run with it. And so as you'll see, if you're tuning in on YouTube, this first slide is the world headquarters of our manufacturing facility. And a little bit of backstory here. In addition to e-commerce, I have a couple rental properties, and I had bought a rental property, and it was owned by a hoarder, and I bought it as is. It was a great deal, but a lot of sweat equity. And it had a 30 by 60 barn out back that I didn't want to rent out. I wanted to keep it to myself, and it needed a lot of work. And so as we look at this next slide, this is a picture from the first time that Ken saw it. And Ken, give me your initial reaction. And for those of you tuning in on audio, it's an absolute dump. I mean, just an absolute dump.
Yeah. So I'll try to paint the picture here. So if anybody's listening to the podcast, you're likely an entrepreneur and you likely have ideas, and sometimes they're crazy and sometimes they're not crazy, but they're ideas, right? And so, having David as a business partner is no different. So he calls me up and says, hey, Ken, I got something to show you. Come take a look at this and just trust me. And so I show up, and just imagine this, this huge warehouse, and it just has garbage and trash and old wood, and it's a dirt floor. And he was like, "Welcome to the self-manufacturing world headquarters." And I'm like, what is this? It was insane. But he's like, "Kent, don't worry. I've got a plan. This is going to be a really good idea." So fast forward to now. David, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started with cleaning it out. And if you think of the great big industrial dumpsters, like the 30-yard dumpsters, we filled 3 of those with junk out of this warehouse. And a lot of late nights over there getting this thing cleaned up. But first thing was just to remove all of the junk so we had a clean slate. On this next slide, we poured concrete. And as you can see, it's remarkably better than what it was before. And we ripped down all the old shelving, and this was a good move. Now, with this, if you think of the shape of this particular barn, it's a long rectangle. And we knew that for this particular company, we wanted to have a manufacturing area, which we wanted to be heated and cooled, right, to keep our employees comfortable. But we also wanted a warehousing section. And so what we did, if you look at this next slide, we framed up some walls and divided this into thirds. And so a third of it is climate controlled. That's where all of our tooling is. And the other 2/3 is where we have shelving. And I have to say, we had never done this before, and we're really flying by the seat of our pants, but it was fun. And instead of getting overwhelmed, we always just focused on, all right, what's the next thing we need to do? And, from the get-go, it was, all right, we need to clean out the trash. Okay, now we need concrete. Okay, now we need some walls. And we just continued to focus on that next step. And that is where we were at. Now, shelving. I met, and I'll have to put a link in the show notes to this story. I met this guy, and he's over in Illinois, and he goes into he'll go into like an Anheuser-Busch, really big warehouses, and he'll tear down all their shelving and set up new shelving. And then he will sell that used shelving. And I'll tell you what, the guy was passionate about his job. He told me that, he said the Industrial Revolution would have never happened had there not been shelving. Because you can make all this stuff, but where are you going to put it? How are you going to stay organized? And I was like, that's a hot take on shelving, but you're right. It is helpful in organizing stuff. And so, what we learned here is that you can buy used shelving for 30 cents on the dollar, and it will perform the same as brand new shelving. And so from an overhead standpoint, we thought, let's go with used shelving, 0 buyer's remorse. It's sturdy, it stands up, it fits all of our packages, and it was kind of fun to set this all up. So if you're going to be doing warehousing, or a component of your manufacturing is warehousing, look into used shelving. And anyway, so that was kind of like the build of our manufacturing facility. And next was our tooling. Now, keep in mind, this particular portfolio company we had for 4 years, but we had never made one of these products. We had no idea how to make them. We just went to an experienced supplier. We'd place an order, and they'd make them, and they'd show up in their final form, and they did a great job. And this was something that we really had a lot of fun with it, I think. We ordered 3 types of tools. One was a cutter, one was a heat stamp, and one was a riveter. And they showed up, and we needed to learn how to use them. And so anyway, we got that set up, and that's the rest of the picture slides. But what I'll say about this is, I think there are 2 types of people generally, as it relates to this topic. There are some people where we spent $10K on machinery that we did not know how to operate. That could be daunting to some people. We were very excited about it. We were excited to learn how to use it. And so I think if you're thinking about going the self-manufacturing route, ask yourself, is this overwhelming? Is solving this problem going to be overwhelming to me? And I don't know if it's a personality type or whatever, but we enjoyed it. We enjoyed learning the tooling, trying new things. Probably the first 500 units that we made went right in the trash can. because we were learning it, but we eventually mastered the tooling and got everything set up optimally. And I went down a very deep rabbit hole on lean manufacturing and like shaving milliseconds or seconds off of production time. So like an example of this was I took the average height of our employees, which was 5'10", and I had them stand up straight and put their arms out at parallel to the ground. And I measured that. And on average, it was 38 inches. So we set up all of our tooling to be when someone just sticks their hands up, it's right there. And that was something that it took an extra 5 minutes to do. But if you're setting up a workbench, why not do that? And we also set up everything for right-handed people. And we placed everything that was used frequently near the manufacturing equipment. And we had a nice flow. You know, we receive raw materials at one end of the building, and then it just flows through the manufacturing process and leaves out the other side. And so, you know, this is something that we're going to continuously fine tune, but it was a fun project. And as I look back on that dump that we started with back in March and look at where we're at now, I'm proud of what we've done. And so anyway, that's a bit of our story.
Sorry to interrupt the episode. You may have heard Ken and I talking recently about a new tool that we're using for Amazon refunds. Now, I have used other refund tools like this. However, I can tell you in the first 7 days, they scrubbed the back end of my Amazon account going back 18 months and found $5,000 of refunds. And the nice thing about this is it's my money. Amazon made a mistake and they are just auditing my account. The other thing I really like about this tool is there is no monthly fee. They only charge a commission if they are successful in getting you your money. Go to Getida.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM for Firing the Man, FTM400. This is an awesome tool. Can't say enough good things about it. Now, back to the episode.
But Ken, can you dive into what has been the impact on this brand as we've moved to self-manufacturing?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for sharing that story, David. The slides will definitely do it justice if you go download those slides. Before I get into the impact, I want to circle back on something you said, David. You said to the audience that we're flying by the seat of our pants. And I agree. And I would say we're mostly always flying by the seat of our pants. And I think that is a good thing, as if you're listening to the podcast and maybe this inspires you to self-manufacture or at least explore that idea for your brand, just know that most everyone that are solving really complex problems are flying by the seat of their pants. Like one person that I can think of off the top of my head, Elon Musk, probably one of my favorite people on the planet. He is going to get us to Mars. He's created electric vehicles, has a boring company, has Neuralink. He has all of these companies. And that dude is flying by the seat of his pants. He's figuring shit out and he's accomplishing stuff. And so just try not to, sometimes we get in our heads and we block ourselves. But to get over those hurdles, we have to fly by the seat of our pants. And David and I, we admit it. We do that every single day.
And I would add to that we are living in the best possible era to do that. And I'll give an example. 100 years ago, if you wanted to become a blacksmith and there was no blacksmith in your town, well, guess what? You're probably not going to become a blacksmith. Okay. But with YouTube and the power of the internet and the number of resources that are out there, most of them for free, you can really figure out just about anything. And so when we've had certain employees come to us and say, like, I don't know how to do this. And it's like, well, did you Google it? Because you're coming to me with this problem. I don't know how to solve it, but I'm going to go Google it and, work towards solving this. And so, yeah, there could not be a better time in history to fly by the seat of your pants than right now. It's the information age. So,
yeah, totally agree. All right. The impact of self-manufacturing for this brand. I'm going to rip through this list pretty quick, but there's a lot of good stuff here. And this is now, we're actually looking on, this is the positive impact it had after we accomplished the self-manufacturing portion. Number one, inventory management and on-demand production. Anyone selling, especially in Amazon or any other marketplace, knows that if you're selling physical products, inventory management is one of your top KPIs you need to be aware of. And with the last 18 months, with COVID, with inventory restrictions, we have a process in place now. We've been able to do on-demand production. And so what that means is the units that we sell the week prior, that our production team has a list. They know what we sold. They know whatever marketplace it is, Amazon, Walmart, International, they know what we sold. And for the production report for the following week, it kicks out and says, okay, this is what we have in inventory. This is what we sold. Let's equalize that. And we have exactly what we need to in inventory, as well as if we want to send an extra for a product launch, for anything, we have that on-demand production. And that's been crucial. Now, to put this into perspective, you've seen the production facility. So we currently have one full-time employee on production and one part-time employee on production. And in that facility, we're making about 4,800 units a month. Now, it might not seem like a lot, but it's enough to sustain that brand. And so if you try to quantify that, like, oh, what would I need to make all the units for my brand to sell? And it might not be what you think, or you might be able to accomplish it with a lot less. And these numbers are really only our phase one numbers. And as we expand and add more machines and tooling and people, that number will incrementally go up. So just put it in perspective, about 5,000 units per month out of that facility. In-house quality control, we touched on this earlier, but it is crucial. And our team takes pride in having high quality, and everything that's stamped, that's made in our facility, we know like it's been through these quality control checks that our SOP has. This is something I touched on a little bit earlier, but launching new products. Before, we had MOQ, there's all these other issues. Now, there's no MOQ. If we want to try it, we have R&D, we have research and development, we have on-site testing, and we have no MOQ, right? If we want to try a new product, we just go and make it on the machines and test it and try it right there. Like, it's so fast. And we actually launched a couple of products recently, and we're quicker to market than any other competitors. Like, if there's a new product that pops up, or we'll say, okay, let's go test this and try it out and make our own version. Well, we can get to market before anyone else, because we could probably be making that the very next week and testing it. So it's really nice to have. Here's some real numbers for you. So Q4 of 2021, and if you're an FBA and especially last year, you're hit with inventory restrictions, right? And so what we did was we created copies of all of our listings and turned them into fulfilled by merchant. And we shipped out 2,000 additional orders in Q4 of 2021 due to FBA stockouts. So when your FBA listing goes out of stock, it kicks over to FBM. And so we were able to capture an additional 2,000 orders by having that capability of shipping out of our production facility and warehouse. So that was a direct impact to the bottom line. Now we're going to move into profitability, and I'm going to kick it over to the numbers guy, David.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if I could go an entire podcast without talking about profitability. It's that inner accounting nerd that just likes to flex. So what we did is we looked at, after we account for all the raw materials, all of our labor for making these products, we went through, in this particular product line, we're probably making about 150 different SKUs, but looked at average savings per unit. And what we found was average savings range between 25 and 35%, which seems high, but it makes complete sense, right? We were doing all of this through a manufacturer, and they need to make money too. And what we have found is they were probably making about 25 to 30% profit margin. And so by taking this in-house and cutting out that middleman, we really have a direct-to-consumer model that it's really paying dividends. And I would also add that, on some of these, it may be only $1.50 difference or $2 difference. But if you multiply that over several thousand units, that all falls to the bottom line. And so I would say e-commerce every year continues to get more and more competitive, and you have to be scrappy. And I think that this is a way that you can be scrappy and increase your competitive advantage over your competitors that are still relying on a manufacturer. And what I'll also add is that the manufacturer that you're previously ordering from, they're not going to disappear. You can continue to engage with them. You don't have to produce all of your units. Maybe this is a supplemental thing, but it definitely has, the numbers have proven out that this is a good thing. Now, when I look at, from a dollars and cents standpoint, how has this impacted our business? We have, in just annual savings, $21,000 on this particular business. And if you look at all of our tooling and all of that setup cost, it was about 15 grand. And so you're looking at a payback period of about 8 months, which is unbelievable. In real estate, they say if you can find a payback period under 7 years, then buy that property, go for it. And so the tooling is, it's an investment. And if you think of it as an investment vehicle, it has returned to us over 100% this year. And so that's just in what we've produced. Now, I would say there is additional profit margin coming into this company from the on-demand production. We've had certain products that have surged, and had we had to rely on a 90-day lead time, we'd be sitting out of stock. Our ranking would plummet. So to be able to stay in stock and to, if you have a surge last week, you're sending out units the following week. That's huge for in-stock rate. And so I would say that probably provides more value to this company than just the annual savings on our unit costs. So anyway, that's my profitability spiel. And anyway, over to you, Ken.
Yeah, sure.
And what I want to say is we've highlighted a lot of the good parts, but there have been downsides. So let's talk about those too.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would say is anybody that's trying to sell you something, or anybody that says, oh, it paints a rosy picture about anything without negatives, that's a red flag, right? And so we don't do that here on this show. And so we're going to talk about the downsides of what we have experienced in our journey, and something to look at if you do decide to make a business case of self-manufacturing for your own brand. Here are some things that we've found that were downsides. Number one, different types of supply chain issues. So instead of finished goods, if you're importing from China, instead of having that issue of getting those finished goods from China, you might have issues of raw materials. And so we've found that. And so in order to self-manufacture, you need to have all the raw materials available to make your products. And so you just kind of move the issues closer to you instead of, finished goods, they're raw materials now. Good workers are hard to find. And this has been one of our top challenges, is finding really good help. In our area, it's like $15 an hour starting wage, and depending on where you are, could be much higher. And so there's just a shortage, in the last 12 to 18 months of labor, and finding help and finding good quality help. A players. We want A players on our team. We have a great crew now, and it's tough to find good people. A couple of other items on that. One is no employee is going to care as much about quality control as you do. And so if you're bringing in people, they're just trying to get by, and they're going to do a crappy job. And so finding someone that will really want to take pride in their work and make a quality product is huge. One thing we've used is a veteran, our shop manager, warehouse manager, production manager, they're veterans. So we have a partner with a veteran job placement program. So it's one of the things that you can take a peek at. Learning phase. So through the learning phase, we had a lot of scrap material. So we're trying to figure out the machines and tooling and efficiency. So that's wasted money and lost production time as we're, calibrating the machines and the tools. And then also you have to create all your SOPs. Like, you have nothing. You're basically figuring it out and starting from scratch. And so there is a ramp up in a learning phase that you're not going to hit the ground running. It's going to take, there's going to be steps. One of my favorite sayings, there's levels to this shit, right? So the next one is startup costs. You got your infrastructure, your building, your tooling and equipment, shelving, like David covered, staffing, and then all the little things, tables, coffee machines, cups, trash cans, all of that stuff. It adds up. And so think about that stuff and list it out on your business case. And then David covered this a little bit earlier, payback period. This is, and I want to give a quote out, Shark Tank, for anybody who listens to or watches Shark Tank. One of Kevin's favorite sayings is, His dollars are like little soldiers, and he releases them into the world, and he wants to know how long it's going to take them to go find other little soldiers and bring them back to him. So basically your return on investment. And so you're going to want to calculate that based off of all of your expenses, what you think your startup costs are, and what does it make how much is it to make your product, and then how much will you save per unit, and then you kind of back into that. But you should know what most of those costs are, and so you can make those calculations, kind of get a rough idea of what your payback period is going to be. And then moving over to kind of more of the benefits and consequences of self-manufacturing. David.
Absolutely. So, the first one, and this is an unanticipated benefit, is the ability to make something is incredibly satisfying, and it creates value. And I think of my job, most of my work is stored either in the cloud or on a hard drive. And I can work a long day and I can't, physically see anything that was done. It's all stored in the cloud. Now, it is incredibly satisfying to set up a manufacturing process and go in at the end of the week and say, oh, we made 1,200 units this week. This is awesome. And there's just something about seeing that the physical product being made is incredible. You're much less reliant on your suppliers, right? We're in the business of selling physical products, and say your supplier decides to compete against you, or say they go out of business. You're very heavily reliant on them. I would say in terms of like the team, they're probably one of the most important players on your team. Without them, you don't have a business. And so the ability to take some of this in-house gives you some independence, and it really allows you to create some real value. The other thing I would say is that your suppliers can be your friend and not necessarily your competitor. And, one thing that we did is we talked to one of our suppliers and we said, listen, we would, you already have a big backlog and it's impacting our business. And so we would like to start self-manufacturing. And you have our word. We're willing to put it in writing. We will never compete against you. We don't want to go after any of your wholesale accounts. All we want to do is manufacture our own product. And that was really helpful. In fact, we even went on a site visit to their factory, and they've been in business for about 25 years. And the amount of information that we learned on that site visit was invaluable. And so I think that's been the approach that we take. We didn't want to sneak around, and we've had great relationships with our suppliers, so we want to keep it that way. And a couple other miscellaneous unanticipated benefits would be if you have a manufacturing space, you're probably going to have a spot for storage. This is great for excess inventory. And we certainly have used this to dodge long-term storage fees out of Amazon when we do removal orders. So some unanticipated consequences. One is tooling breaks down and requires preventative maintenance. And this is something that there's a saying, one is none and two is one. And that just speaks to having a backup for everything. And so, when we ordered $10,000 worth of tooling that we didn't know how to use, we didn't really want to buy two of each machine, like right out of the gate, because we wanted to learn how to use the machines. But very quickly, we've learned that it really pays to have backups. And that's something that is going to kind of be phase 2 of our self-manufacturing, is making sure that we have backups on tooling and spare parts and all of that. Another unanticipated consequence would be the implications at exit. And I would say we are kind of in a boom right now for acquisitions in the e-commerce space, with all of the aggregators surfacing over the last probably 12 to 24 months. And some of those aggregators, or really any potential buyer, is not going to want to take over that manufacturing responsibility. So it does kind of hurt you from a transferability standpoint, depending on the buyer. Now, you may have a buyer that's already a manufacturer and they think this is great. We can bring all that tooling in-house. But I would say your pool of buyers is shrunk by an unquantified amount. And so I will also say another consequence is it is very easy to create a new job for yourself. And Ken and I read a great book this year called Who, Not How. And it speaks to finding the right people for the job as opposed to figuring out how you can complete the job. And, as we were learning the tooling, I had several nights over there till 1 or 2 in the morning trying to learn this. And I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it, but it is easy to create a new job for yourself. And I think your time may be better spent operating your business as opposed to working in your business. So a couple of things to think about before diving into self-manufacturing. One is, what type of equipment would be involved in this manufacturing process? And this varies widely. If you're making smartphones, this probably is not feasible from a dollars and cents standpoint. And so I would, if you have an existing product, look at it and think, how could I, what type of tooling is needed to manufacture this? And there's going to be certain things that are a good fit and certain things that aren't. I think when you get into injection molding and some of those higher end type manufacturing processes, you're looking at 6 and 7 figure type tooling, and that's a huge risk. We were willing to roll the dice on this one because it was a relatively low input cost on tooling. And if it was a total bust, it really wouldn't have put this company out of business. Now, if we would have had $1 million of injection molding and it didn't work, well, that's a big problem. So one other thing is, where do you find tooling? And this was not as easy as a Google search. What we did was we went to all of our raw material suppliers and we said, of the people that are buying raw materials from you, what type of machines are they using? And I would say that there was an investigation piece here in terms of finding what types of tooling was out there, but I would say 20 phone calls, generally you can probably have this pretty well buttoned up, just asking people. And so, another thing I would mention is, if you're thinking about self-manufacturing, what parts of the process can you outsource? And so we are not doing our own packaging. We're not printing on the cardboard, right? We still get that through a vendor. All of our product inserts we're still getting through a vendor, as well as the barcoding. And so we are just doing the assembly. And got a friend who also in the e-commerce space, he's in liquids, and he does not produce any of the liquids. However, he mixes them. And, in talking to him, he said, I bid off the part of the manufacturing process that I can chew. And that makes sense. He understands the ratios of liquids that need to be mixed together, and he does that. And, that creates an advantage for him in terms of profit margin. So those are just some kind of miscellaneous things to think about before you dive into self-manufacturing. Now, Ken, if people don't want to, or say they explore self-manufacturing and decide, this isn't for me, but they're still interested in sourcing products on U.S. soil, what are some resources that they could look to?
Sure. And, for anybody listening, we have this download on our website, firingtheman.com/USA, and it's got all the hyperlinks in there. But a couple of the ones that stand out to us, thomasnet.com. It's essentially in the Alibaba of the U.S. It's been around for a really long time. It's kind of clunky, but it's what we have. Another one is mfg.com, makersrow.com, and madeinamerica.com. Those are all 4 that we use to, find suppliers, look around. We have another link here for trade shows. This blog here has got the top 30 trade shows in the USA for US-based suppliers. So go check it out and see if there's one close by your house. Go, or fly into Vegas, wherever the big ones are, and take a peek at US-based suppliers. It'll open your eyes a little bit. One pro tip too is, and this is something that David actually did, was he mentioned it earlier. He actually went to our current supplier and did a site visit and looked, got the entire, site visit, looked at all the equipment, the manufacturing, talked to the people on the floor, and just really look and got visibility into the entire process. And that helped out a lot, because then he knew, okay, well, these machines do this. This is how they're doing that. And I mean, they've been doing it for 20 or 30 years. You're going to learn a lot from someone that's been doing something from a very long time. So it's another thing to think about. If you've made a business case, you're like, okay, yep, self-manufacturing sounds like it's something that I want to do, I would definitely recommend doing a supplier visit.
Absolutely. And I would even say that it doesn't, if you have some concern about approaching your current supplier about this, say you're selling wooden countertops and you don't want to go to your wooden countertop manufacturer. Well, go find a wooden table maker. You know what I mean? If you look at manufacturing processes, there is some overlap here. And I'll also say is most people like to talk about themselves. I think that's just general, if someone were to call me and say, I'm fascinated by what you're doing, can I see it? I would probably say, yeah, come on over. I like to talk about what I'm up to. And that's something that I think sometimes people just get lost in, like the YouTube or Reddit threads. And if you want to know how to do something, go ask someone who's done it. And so anyway, to wrap this up, what are some key takeaways? I think everyone should do just an analysis of what would self-manufacturing look like in my business. And it may be very quick and you may say, no, not a good fit. But I also think you should look at who are some suppliers in the USA. And I would say just about everyone that I've talked to has been hit pretty hard with the tariffs and shipping costs. And it's prudent just to look into better alternatives, right? That's just good business. And so, as Ken mentioned, that list of where to find these manufacturers is available at firingtheman.com/USA. And I would encourage everyone to do that. So anyway, that is our experience with self-manufacturing and why we think manufacturing in the USA is something you definitely should look into. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in this week, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's Firing the Man podcast. If you like this episode, head on over to firingtheman.com and check out our resource library for exclusive Firing the Man discounts on popular e-commerce subscription services. That is firingtheman.com/resource. You can also find a comprehensive library of over 50 books that Ken and I have read in the last few years that have made a meaningful impact on our business. For that, head on over to www.firingtheman.com/library. Lastly, check us out on social media at Firing the Man and on YouTube at Firing the Man for exclusive content. This is David Schomer.
And Ken Wilson.
We're out. Before you go, we wanted to share a new service that Ken and I have been using called Getita that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida.com, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?